I'm very happy to be here. So thank you. As Thomas already know, because I listened to my presentation some weeks ago in Visby, I'm not a real expert on the topic of today. I'm a semiotician working especially on cultural memory and on space, spatiality. But I had the occasion to study this topic and to think about the topic of today when some years ago, I collaborated to a project, the project memory of ANDRA, the National Agency of France for Nuclear Waste, and the University of Limoges. I collaborated among the others with Jean-Noël Dumont, that I think is a speaker of today, and he will speak next to me, I think, if I'm not wrong. So I contributed, especially in that project, to the research line about the environmental design of the site of CIGEO, which is the deep geological repository in France, in France. And then in this short talk of today, I will focus on let's say, on a specific subfield of the so-called nuclear semiotics. I'm taking for granted that all of you know what nuclear semiotics is, what's the let's say the main issue at stake when talking of nuclear semiotics. But in short, we could say that the main problem in this case of site marking, of marking a site where a geological repository is located, it can be summarized as follows: how to signal to future generation the presence, the function, and the related risk in case of intrusion of a deep geological repository through the spatial organization of the site. And so somehow the main issue is how to make visible on the surface, which is invisible deep down, which is invisible buried deep down. And from this angle, we could say that what is at stake then, it's not just designing a long-term warning communication message warning, but to make the site itself a message. A special message built on space, to turn the site organization into a significant morphology that carries and express a long-term memory. So the first problem, as shown in this slide, is exactly what is this relation between the surface and what's below the surface. So what's visible and what's invisible. And the problem is to make visible on the surface what's visible under the surface, but also what kind of narrative we are adopting about what's buried deep down. Is it disposal or storage, for example? This has consequences about how we are going to conceptualize this object that we are making disappear. And this is interesting because actually it's something that has been discussed. For example, something that is being discussed recently is about the problem of retrievability of this nuclear waste, because we don't know if in 100 years, in 1000 years, future generation will be able to extract value from what we now consider waste. So maybe also the notion of storage could be in the future useful for us. Of course, the second most important dimension of the problem is the destiny of the site. What shall we do? Shall the site be sealed and forgotten, or signaled and marked and communicated somehow? We have different paradigms about it. I'm not talking about this today. Instead, I would like to talk to you with you today about these. Can you tell me if you can see the whole slide and not all these strange things that I see also in my screen? You see the complete slide? Are you? Yes, okay, perfect. So in a report that I wrote for ANDRA, with Nanda Novello Payanti, a colleague of mine, and a collaborator of the same project. I analyzed, with help of semiotics, some solution that have been proposed in the last decades about how to signal the presence of nuclear waste repository. Many of these solutions are very well known to all of you, I imagine, so I'm not going into details about this right now, but just to show you that eventually what I did is to group these different proposals according to the relation they pose between the subject, the potential visitor of the future, and the object, the site itself. So we will have a site that that are meant to keep out the visitor, like in the corner top left, that works as a kind of negative monument. You know, they are supposed to scare, to repel, and in any case to keep away the visitor from the site. We have also other solutions that wanted to inform this visitor about the risks, about the potential risk of entering and digging in the site. But we have also, I think that the most interesting solution are on the right side of this square, in which, for example, the idea of the site as a living landscape. So as something, a landscape, a space that is supposed to be accessible in the future on the surface, but and gain a kind of a second life, but incorporating the traces of transformation. So still able to communicate what has happened there when the repository was established. We have also other sites that are supposed to be accessible on the surface, but through the mediation of an institution. Like, for example, the picture here, the corner, right corner on the bottom is in Bure, France, where CIGEO has built some facilities, some museums, some places where the activities of CIGEO are communicated. And somehow, okay, this is the naked version of this. This is a semiotic square, so you don't need to know what's this, but just to understand how from here I got here. Somehow these four semantic models pinpoint different forms of temporality, for example, and more than everything, they pinpoint different forms of communication and dialogue with these men of the future, no? And ideally, these different forms of temporality and communication with the future can be represented with four objects as examples of the kind of communication that is posed, is instituted by the models of set marking that we saw. These examples are all very popular in the field of nuclear semiotics. For example, you see here the pioneer plaque, the plaque that was supposed to communicate with extraterrestrial forms of life and send to a pioneer in the space, so, which is a kind of message in a battle, and we don't know anything about the recipient of this message and of this battle as well. We have the Tutankhamun course, the Tutankhamun seal in the top left corner. But we know how it finished. It did not, the seal, the course did not deter people to break the seal and entering the room. We have also other forms of, which is more interesting as before on the right side of the square, the case of in the living landscape of natural and anthropic traces that are the best indicator of what sort of human activity has taken place in the site, because they can always be interpreted in the future. And also another very well-known example, which is the clock of the Long Now. It's a clock built by this Long Now Foundation, which is working exactly on this idea of communication to this long-term communication. And for those of you who don't know what this is about, it's a clock that it is designed to keep the time for 10,000 years at least. But what's interesting for us is that it needs an institution. It is an institution because the clock has to be, it has to have the possibility to evolve, so to be changed. Some parts are technology advances, or it should be also maintained. So we need an institution. Why all these different examples that I'm showing you? Because somehow we could, I think, we are in front of a kind of a paradigm shift from the first formulation of the problem of nuclear semiotics, of how can we communicate with the man of the future. We are slowly approaching this different formulation of the problem, which is now how can we establish a durable and transmissible memory about the meaning and nature of the deposit site. Also, the idea of an active marking of the site through a monumental logic is kind of abandoned now. So we are in front of kind of two models. We have on the one hand the idea that nuclear waste is a kind of a material legacy that we are condemned to leave to next generations, which is a kind of heritage, a negative heritage to be transmitted, but also this is the first model. The second model, on the other hand, is that the nuclear waste can be considered as a heritage to be transmitted, which is a kind of provocative, probably, idea about nuclear waste, but that is, I will show you some example. I think it's a solution that's interesting to consider. So we are on the one hand, the idea of long-term messages as the communication of an interdiction against the idea of transmission of a memory. So let's say that in the first phase of nuclear semiotics, we saw something like this. We had to transfer a message through centers, not to time from a t on 0 to a t on n, with n, sorry. Now we are in front of something like this. It's not about anymore, it's not about communicating to far future generation, but it's more about telling a convincing story to the next generation, giving them an explanation that they will be supposed to rearrange and pass again to the next generation again. And this is somehow also here there is at play the difference between communicative and cultural communication that's proposed by Jan Asman. And so it's not anymore how do we signal the presence of buried nuclear waste to future generation, but it is mainly, this is what is at stake, how do we tell the story of what's beneath the ground and why we are burying or we bury it. So we are in front of something like this. That's exactly the problem of heritage. Not heritage, it's like leaving a legacy to the generation, but we don't know. Actually, we are not talking with the last square on the right. That's like a gentle, that's like an ideal representation of the man of the future, but there will be someone else in the future, in the next generation, interpreting, selecting, narrativizing, translating this legacy, extracting meaning somehow, making sense out of it, and it is somehow the process of heritage. Somehow the Ray Cat solution imagined by Paolo Fabbri and François Bastide about this. Everybody has focused, you know the story. Paolo Fabbri and François Bastide imagined to modify the DNA of breed of an inbreed of cats, so that they change color nearby radioactive source, let's say. And parallel to this, a culture about cats will be constructed, spreading myths, stories, narratives about the fact that if a cat changes color, this means that you have to leave the site. this is everybody has focused on the problem of the biomarker of the cat itself that changes color. Instead, the most interesting part of Paolo Fabbri proposal was that he was imagining a model of transmission of memory transmission of a heritage somehow. So this means exactly that somehow nuclear waste is a peculiar form of heritage. We don't know what is negative heritage, anti-heritage, difficult heritage. We don't know what kind still, but we could we have to work on this. And I agree very much with the work of Cornelius Salter, who is it is just one sentence extracted by his work. They wrote many chapters, books about this topic, and the idea is that somehow heritage can make understand a lot about the problem of nuclear waste disposal, but also nuclear waste disposal can teach us something about heritage as well. I agree a lot with this idea.
Are you, Francesco?
Yes.
Sorry, are you finalizing?
Sorry?
Are you about to finalize?
Yes, I'm finished.
Yes, perfect.
I'm going to the conclusion. So we have many analogies between cultural heritage and nuclear waste. Nuclear waste as a materiality that needs to be preserved just as cultural heritage. It needs to be maintained. We need an institution taking care of this. But also more than anything else, it needs meaning, a narrative that signify the value of this difficult kind of heritage. So to finish, last slide, we focused a lot on the process of transmission of this message in a battle thrown in a far future, while probably when we have having the problem of designing a message to explain what's buried in these deposits, we should focus more on the fact on how the subject of enunciation is represented inside the narrative of this message in a battle. So who is talking through these site marking strategies, to not just to whom we are talking, but who is talking, and how are we justifying somehow what we did to the environment. So I close this year, but if there are questions, I'm happy to. I just try to synthesize the conclusion. Thank you for the attention.